What are you most excited about as you start as CEO, both the mission as well as the organization?
So interestingly enough, as business, we find ourselves in a very critical time. As an economy, we are facing very serious challenges. So I think the question we ought to be asking ourselves as business, and I think what we need to answer is, what does this mean for business? What is the role that business ought to be playing? How are we going to ensure that we move the dial? What is it from an interventions perspective and a programs perspective that we need to be doing from a business perspective to ensure that we move things along? The South African economy at the moment is characterized by low growth, which therefore manifests itself in joblessness. And unfortunately, because of joblessness, you're sitting with a 38% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition that you find in the country today. You're sitting with more people that are unemployed than those that are employed in all the provinces except Gauteng and Western Cape. It is a crisis. It is problematic. As business, we ought to be saying, what do we need to do to change the status quo? You're currently sitting with inequality that is at its highest. Our Gini coefficient at the moment is sitting at 0.63. We have just overtaken Brazil as the most unequal economy in the world. It cannot be. It is a problem from a structural perspective. It is a problem because we know that at some point in this country, the oppressed once rose up against, such issues. We ought to ensure that that doesn't happen again. What is it, therefore, that we're going to ensure, or that rather that we're going to do to ensure that this inequality doesn't persist? Because honestly, in my view, the biggest ticking time bomb that we have in this country is that of inequality. And I think it is a tragedy, of course, that we're sitting with more than 50% poverty levels in this country. It cannot be. It is not right. Business ought to be answering, what is it that we're going to do to deal with those issues? Because unless and until those issues are taken care of, then unfortunately, whatever it is that we need to achieve as business, we're not going to be able to achieve. Because unfortunately, as business, we can only prosper in a prosperous society.
What goals do you have for the company?
The biggest challenge for BLSA at the moment is to ensure that we stabilize the economy. Unless and until we have a stable economy, business, big business in particular, is not going to prosper. It is a problem that we have not achieved more than 2% growth since 2013. It cannot be. You have to ask yourself, how does business operate in that environment? What is it, therefore, that needs to be done to ensure that we change that? And I think the strategy and the focus and the things that we ought to be working on as business needs to be those that are going to answer and solve for precisely that economic challenge, as it were. Because if we don't, unfortunately, business remains the biggest losers in the economy. We are the only social partner with disproportionate resources and therefore a disproportionate voice. How do we use our disproportionate voice and disproportionate resources to achieve that which we need to achieve?
You've highlighted that, and what really needs to be to happen to achieve this goal, probably just to reiterate that those things which you've highlighted there and there, and which have been biggest challenges there. What more needs to be done to achieve those goals?
So to move the dial from an economic perspective, my view is that because our country is characterized by low skills and unskilled people, we need to probably identify what are the industries that are labor intensive. What is it that we need to do to stimulate those industries? And because the stimulation of those industries is therefore going to get people into jobs. So the biggest crisis that South Africa faces at the moment is to get people into jobs, because unfortunately the economic will only start turning once you have people in jobs. Because once people are working, then they have disposable income. If they have disposable income, then they can buy your goods and services as businesses. And if they are buying your goods and services, then you need to produce more. And because you need to produce more, then you need to hire more hands. And because you need to hire more hands, there's more people off the streets that can have jobs. And if there's more people off the streets that can have jobs, then you start dealing with issues of poverty. And once poverty is taken care of, then inequality reduces. And if inequality reduces, then you are on your way to achieving an economic structure that is stable. You are on your way to achieving an economic structure that has got a bulging middle class, because we all know that it is the middle class that sustains economies, not the rich. So it starts by getting people into jobs. So the key and the challenge for us from a South African perspective, and maybe from a business perspective, is how do we use our investments to focus on those industries that are going to indeed get people into jobs. But I think the other thing about it is that it helps the fiscus challenge, because this current formula of having 7 million people who earn enough to pay pay as you earn, and 17 million people who are dependent on some form of social grant or the other, it's not sustainable. We need to see, how are we going to change that? How do we get more people off the social grant system? How do we ensure that we increase our tax base, as it were? I was reading the paper the other day, and Minister Tito Mboweni and the CEO of SARS is worried that once again South Africa is going to miss its target from a revenue collection perspective. It's a problem, it's a crisis, because if it means that, it actually means that if we are not reaching our target from a tax revenue collection, then unfortunately our fiscus problem and our spending program, cannot be met. We therefore need to go out into the world to borrow just to ensure that we can do what we need to do. So that cycle is very dangerous and it's problematic. And I think once we get people into jobs, then I think we'll be way on our way to ensure that we stabilize that, as it were.
We can say that things are not that rosy, but we can all agree that it's not doom and gloom. What do you feel is the biggest strength of BLSA, the organization you are heading?
We did a study about 2 years back as BLSA with Quantec, and we wanted to understand the power of BLSA in the South African economy. So we measured a whole lot of different things, but amongst those, we measured the impact and the contribution that BLSA member companies have on the economy from a GDP contribution perspective. And we found that from the 60% respondents, that participated in the study, that 60% was responsible for about 70% of GDP. Now, that is the power that lies in BLSA. We have disproportionate resources. We therefore need to sit and say, how do we use these resources to ensure that we leverage those so that business can achieve what it needs to achieve? How do we use those resources to ensure that we channel and guide particular discussions and debates for them to yield the results that we as business want to yield? How do we ensure that we utilize that power to ensure that you start seeing a South Africa where business leads and government follows, like it is in developed economies? Because once you start talking about issues of the economy, you need to understand that the role of government is to ensure that the environment within which business operates is that which is conducive. They need to ensure that they make the right policy decisions, and the right policy instruments need to be in place so that business can achieve what we need to do. And we can therefore ensure that the economic will continues to turn. So I think BLSA can really utilize their power to guide and start certain discussions.